Welcome to Moments with Marianne. Allow me to interrupt your train of thought with something that may be one of the most interesting things you hear today. This is Marianne Pastana, and our special guest today is Nancy Colier, and she's here to share with us her new book, Can't Stop Thinking: How to Let Go of Anxiety and Free Yourself from Obsessive Rumination. Nancy is a psychotherapist, interfaith minister, author, and public speaker. She graduated from the University of Virginia, Columbia University School of Social Work, the Focusing Institute, and One Spirit Interfaith Seminary. Mindfulness and Buddhist practices form the ground of her psychotherapy and spiritual counseling practices. So let's welcome to the show, Nancy Colier.
Thank you for having me. Delighted to be here.
Now, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. And your book's so timely. I have to ask, what inspired you to write this?
Being a human being with a mind, I suppose, in the sense that we all struggle with overthinking. We all struggle with an addiction to thinking, really. And having been a psychotherapist for nearly 30 years, I have seen over the years how much our own mind creates suffering. And it's not to say that, the situations of our life are not incredibly challenging, and particularly now. But what we do with the situations in life, how we write narratives about them, and just in general, how we focus on what's not working in our life and how we focus on what frightens us and can go wrong and all of that. So much of our suffering is at our own hand, really, and that's through our thinking.
I know you have it listed, how many times a person is thinking thoughts per day.
Well, it always makes me laugh because how on earth they measure that, I don't know. But supposedly we have 60,000 or thereabouts thoughts per day, 80% of which are negative and 95% of which are repetitive. So there's another study too that says 50% of the time we are not present. We are not where we are. So I know, not just from all my clients, but also from my own experience, that thoughts really are the kidnapper of our present moment. They're thieves. And so we're always walking around lost in a storyline. And usually that storyline is negative. And it's usually a place we don't want to be. So I started looking at, what do we really need to create real freedom from our thinking addiction? And, if you look at most of self-help, and there's nothing wrong with it, but it's really about replacing negative thoughts with positive thoughts, which, listen, if we're going to tell ourselves a story, let's tell ourselves a positive story. Why not? Certainly preferable. But it's a bit like putting a hat on dirty hair. It doesn't really work. And when things get really rough, we do revert back to our default negativity. And so what I wanted to come up with, and having been practicing meditation and Buddhism, for many, many years, was a system that took us out of war with our thoughts. So they didn't have to be positive. We didn't have to conquer the negativity. The thoughts could just be happening, and whatever they're saying, whatever they're coming up with, whatever nonsense, or we could be okay regardless. Because what I found over and over again was that if we're still warring with our mind, we're still afraid of the thoughts that are negative. We're still afraid of the thoughts that feel dangerous to us. And that, to me, did not feel like real freedom. I want the mind, and if you do the practices in the book, I hope, and I think it's true, will find that the contents of your thoughts do not have to determine how you are and your mood because you're not your thoughts.
That is so empowering, just to, especially after hearing those stats,
Yeah, right.
You look at
It's
that, you're
true.
like, wow, 95% of the time we're like repeating these negative thoughts that are fishing around in our brain. And you mentioned when we started talking how, this is like an addiction. And do they really classify this as an addiction? And are we addicted?
Well, the DSM, the Diagnostic Manual for Psychology, does not put thinking in there. But if you look at the qualifications for an addiction, thinking fits every single one. And the primary one, and really the most interesting one to me, is that we want to stop and we can't. How many times have we gone down the rabbit hole and we're thinking, why am I still going over this? This is the 112th time, 112,000th time I've re-rehearsed that thing that went wrong, or I didn't like what I said, or I made the wrong move. And yet I keep going down that rabbit hole. Still, I'm looping and looping because, and here's where we bring in compassion, because somewhere our mind believes, and we're certainly trained from the time we're very young to believe this, that somewhere in all of this rehashing, ruminating, re-rehearsing, all of it is an answer. That there's something we're going to find. There's a diamond at the bottom of that rubble that's going to make us feel better. The problem is the only way we know how to make ourselves feel better is to keep thinking about it. And so what we discover is that while our intention is to find a way to think about it that won't hurt so much, or that will be less scary, or whatever it might be, what we discover when we start doing these practices is that more thinking will not lead us to more peace. So if peace is really what we want, then it's a bit like trying to open a door lock with a banana. If we're using thinking to get to peace, we're using the wrong tool. And so we have to learn how to not know something or have something that maybe we regret from the past or whatever it might be, or something painful, and to be able to leave it alone and drop the thinking, trying to think our way into knowing more, into having more control over it, into feeling better. We have to be able to let what was be what it was, let what we don't yet know be unknown, to live in the questions rather than to obsessively keep thinking, trying to gain some control, really.
Yeah, trying to make sense of a story that really is kind of sometimes made up in our mind.
It's usually made up in our mind. It's 99% of the time all a movie that we're telling ourselves. And what creates real freedom is when we can be in relationship with just what's happening without anything added on. What we tend to do, right, is something happens. I don't know, we have a pain in our foot, let's say in this moment. And within 7 seconds, we're off to the races, right? We have some terminal condition, or we're yelling at ourselves that, we didn't go running last week, or we're yelling at ourselves that, we haven't bought the right shoes and that's what it's for. And whatever it is, we've created a movie out of what is just a pain in our foot. So life gets a lot simpler and a lot more joyful, actually, when we just engage with the direct event actually happening without our thinking mind creating this movie with it. And that's one of the most important things I find in starting to get free from this thinking addiction, is that we suddenly are just in contact with life. We're not in contact with our own conditioning, our own wounds, our own sort of myth making, if you will, but we're just in a relationship. It's a bit like going diving without a wetsuit. We're just in life. And you have to experience this to really know what I'm talking about, but it's a completely different way of living.
I know that you've worked with so many people. You're highly regarded in this work and the work that you do. What happens when you meet people and they say, "Well, I can't turn my mind off. I can't stop thinking"?
Yeah, a lot of people say that. And here's the thing. It's not about turning your mind off, right? Just like the lungs pump oxygen, or the liver is our filter, the mind makes thoughts. No big deal. So what I say to them is, you will always fail if your goal is to turn off thinking. What we're doing is taking the backward steps so that you realize you're not the thoughts. You're the one the thoughts are talking to. You're the listener of those thoughts, or the non-listener. So you get to decide, which train do I want to jump on that's coming through the station? What of all of this mostly repetitive stuff do I want to move towards? And when you realize that you're not, because you have a thought doesn't mean you have to think it. Now we're in a different reality. So don't turn off your thoughts, right? We can laugh at them. We can assign them. Oh, that's Aunt Mildred here to tell me everything I do wrong. Or that's Uncle Larry there to tell me that that the world is going to fall apart, whatever it is. Oh, hello. But what do I, as the listener, want to engage with?
You talk about in your book about changing our thoughts. And I was so surprised about that, especially since we just talked about stats of, 80% of our thoughts are negative. I would think that that's really difficult to do.
Well, what we do really is we don't so much change our thoughts, but we start to bring some compassion to our thoughts. It's a sort of strange idea, but let's say that we are rehearsing, going over and over and over something catastrophic that we're sure is going to happen. What we bring compassion to is the sense that, oh, you think that by rehearsing this or continuing to remind yourself about it, you think that you're taking care of yourself. You think that you'll be better equipped should that happen for you to take care of it. Oh, but now I realize that actually what I need to do is take care of this very moment, right now. That's a distraction, really, from am I doing everything in this moment to make sure that that terrifying thing doesn't happen. So we bring a sense of, oh, what is your intention? And just by bringing that compassion, it starts to change. The thoughts start to change because we get it. It's just a primitive way to try and protect ourselves. Or for example, if we are ruminating on a decision that we regret or something that happened in our lives, how can we bring compassion to that? Well, what are we really trying to do? We're continually reminding ourselves of what feels like a mistake so that we don't make that mistake again. That's really the intention there. But what we find is that in doing that, right, we're not able to move forward and make different kinds of decisions because we keep taking ourselves back to that person who made that choice. We are refusing to let ourselves be who we were when we made that choice, with the wisdom we had, with all the faculties that we had at that moment. It perhaps wasn't the choice we might have made in this moment, but we're stalling forgiving that self. And so we stay stuck in that. But again, the intention is to take care of ourselves and never make that kind of mistake again. Or for example, if we're ruminating on something really painful that's happened in our life, we're really trying to say, if I keep bringing it into consciousness, right, it didn't happen for no reason. I'm not abandoning it. To move forward feels almost like it would be to let it go and say, I'm over it, or it never mattered, or it never happened. again, it's an attempt to not abandon our pain. But in truth, what we don't realize in that moment, and our wiser self can remind us, is that we've already changed from that painful thing that happened. We've already changed. We don't have to keep bringing it into consciousness and reminding ourselves of it to keep it relevant. It's already changed us. So we're not saying it didn't happen or it didn't matter. We're just refraining from reminding ourselves every moment and making it a present moment experience. That's all. But so when I say change thoughts, it's more about trying to understand their primitive intention, which is always to keep us safe. And then over time, even that instinct, to tell ourselves all the things wrong with ourselves, it starts because we think that will make us better. So we then understand, wow, that's really not working. Now that becomes a block, or now that becomes suffering, or I'm tired of that. And then we can start to turn our attention to talking to our mind in a little bit more of a disciplined way, in that you can't terrify me anymore, right? You can't, I won't allow you to criticize me anymore. Or I'm tired of hearing about all the decisions that I made with the wisdom I had that you don't approve of. We develop a different relationship with our thoughts as we turn the lens on them. And that, Marianne, is really the critical thing, which is if we're just aligned with our thoughts, we're never noticing them. If we don't have awareness of them, we have no power. We have no say in how we are in our life. The moment we turn the lens and sort of listen in to this radio station playing in our mind all the time, now we start to have some choice. We start to have some control.
Are there tips that you can give our listeners that they can start their awareness practice, to develop that further?
So the first thing is recognizing that maybe my thoughts are part of why I'm struggling. Maybe it's my relationship with thoughts. We have to wake up to the fact that our thinking mind is actually perhaps causing us suffering, that we're moving towards difficulty over and over again. So we realize that, right? We have to pay attention to, how are my thoughts affecting my mood? How are my thoughts? What are my thoughts? And then this is the primary practice. And we can do it, on a meditation cushion, but we don't need that. The truth is, at any point during the day, we can take the step backwards and turn the lens on what's happening in our own mind. That starts to become a habit where you just I do it every couple of hours. I just step back, and as the listener of thoughts, I go, what is my mind telling me right in this moment? And is it helping me or is it hurting me? Is it kind of background noise? Is it distinct words? What kind of words? Are they worry thoughts? Are they helpful thoughts? Are they critical thoughts? Are they grievance thoughts? What is it? So we take this sort of non-judgmental and almost really like a journalist, like a curious journalist. What's happening here? And then we have to be willing, no matter what it is, to come back into the present moment, to drop out of the thinking mind, right? I promise you, if you want to go back into the thoughts, they'll be right there to pick up on. But then we come into the body. So we notice what's happening, and then we drop into physical sensation. So we go into our chest, we go into our abdomen, we feel our feet on the ground. And what we're doing there is we're dropping out of thought. And the beautiful thing is this body that we're all born with is like a direct flight into now. It's the portal to the present moment. The body's always in the present moment. So we're lost in thought. We turn the lens. Oh, look at this. I'm on a beach in, Hawaii that I'm going to be in a month. Or I'm, having that argument I had with my husband again and again from this morning, right? oh, look at that. That's what's happening. Boom. I'm going to drop out of that, be willing to put that on the side of the road for a moment, feel my feet on the ground, take a conscious breath, re-enter this present moment, and then decide, where do I want to go now that I'm back in the present moment? Do I want to pick back up that argument? Do I want to make that choice? Or do I want to stay present and see what's actually happening in my life? So that whole process can take 1 minute, and it starts to become a habit. So we get, actually, what happens over time is that, and it doesn't have to be a lot of time, but we're lost in thought much less of the time. And we actually, what's really exciting is that we start to notice that there are gaps between thinking. For most people that haven't done these practices that I write about in the book, thinking is just 24/7. You're always thinking, and we kind of like that, because when we're thinking, we feel ourselves as existing. I'm thinking about something. I feel Nancy's here. Nancy's thinking about this. Oh, I know this space. It feels like Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. But what starts to happen is you start turning the lens on thought, is that these gaps happen where you realize, I wasn't thinking. And that is an incredibly peaceful space. That's a beautiful space. And what we realize is, wow, I still exist when I'm not thinking. Now, initially it's a little scary. Like, where did I go? Where did I go? I wasn't thinking. Wait, where was I? But we get used to that, and it starts to be kind of like a flow state where you're just doing something, and there's no you doing it that you're aware of. You're just in it. And those gaps between thoughts can become more of our resting space.
Well, thank you for going over that. And I think it's so nice that we can make some little changes today that will have big, really big impacts for us tomorrow.
Yeah, the lens turning. For your listeners, if you just start with that, being able to set up a practice where maybe 10 minutes a day, you make a real practice of stepping out of thinking and just maybe paying attention to your breath, or paying attention to a candle, or to bodily sensation. It really doesn't matter what the focus is. That it's not something magical about the breath. Like people choose. The reason we choose the breath is simply because the breath's always here. If you're alive, there's breath. So when the thinking mind comes in, we just say back to the breath. And what we're doing in part there is taking a break from thinking, taking a break from being on this sort of constant habit trail of the mind. We're also training ourselves to not be so in love with our thoughts. We're trained from the time we're young to be so enamored with our thinking, right? We take credit for our thoughts. We also take the blame and blame ourselves for bad thoughts. We're not to blame for bad thoughts, and we really can't take the credit for good thoughts. They're just happening. So when we keep coming back to the breath, or whatever we're focused on in a meditation, what we're doing is sort of lightening our fascination and just deep love for what's coming out of our mind. We'll get back to you in 10 minutes, promise. But right now I'm going to stay with the breath. We're also doing one other thing if we set up any kind of awareness practice, which is we're building this muscle. If you imagine, looking out at a raging ocean that's choppy and waters and all sorts of swells from a peaceful shore, we're strengthening that muscle that can stay on the shore and look out at this raging sea that is our mind. So if people are up for it, even just 10 minutes a day of noticing thoughts, but coming back to something other than thoughts is changes your life. I will say, even a 10-minute practice per day changes your life.
And that's good to know that we don't have to be, meditating or doing a practice for 2 hours, to
No,
get it.
no. And when we start to also do a regular practice, it's really interesting, but we'll find ourselves, in the middle of some crazy traffic jam or in some fight with a colleague or what have you. And there's a place inside us that's okay, that's calm, that shore that can look out at all these choppy waters and sometimes look out at a tsunami. Um, it can maintain this sense of okayness, of at peaceness that is developed through this practice, because we realize again and again, Marianne, that we are not our thoughts. And once we get that, we are on our way to a different kind of peace, which does not rely on the contents of our life being everything that we want it to be.
Well, on that note, I want to talk about one of the next topics that you have in your book. You talk about non-judgmental, just being non-judgmental permanently. And I wonder how we can do that. I mean, people cut us off on the 5 freeway and we're trying to get everything's hectic. It seems like the world is a little bit more chaotic now.
Well, part of the non-judgmental attitude has to do with the judgment of our own thoughts. That's where I like people to start. So all sorts of stuff is coming out of our mind, right? Some crazy stuff. I have one client that, when she stands on the subway track, thoughts come at her that say, you're going to jump or you're going to push someone. This is a woman who is, incredibly happy, never going to do any of that. It's just kind of an out of order computer in our own mind. And we're trained to believe that we have to sort of figure out why every thought is happening, that, deep in our unconscious, maybe there's some reason we want to jump or push someone or whatever our crazy is telling us. But what I teach is that it's about not judging what's coming out of your own mind. The only thing we bring to our mind is this sense of, oh, right, you're trying to help, or right, you're just an out of order computer. It's real primitive sometimes in there. So the attitude of non-judgment starts with our own mind. What we do to ourselves is we say, oh, I had a bad thought. I'm a bad person. And then we get all into our thinking about, why do I have those bad thoughts? What's wrong with me that I have those bad thoughts? Bad thoughts just happen. They're just random bits of information. So we don't identify as the thinker, right? We stop judging the thinker. It's just thoughts. We develop that very light attitude towards it. Do we act on the crazy thinking? No. But the fact that we're having them. And then with regard to, being cut off on the freeway, what I always like to say to people is that happens. So, anger arises, frustration arises. We notice that. That's the human response. There's nothing wrong with that. And then this is where it gets juicy and interesting, which is, do I want to keep regurgitating that grievance? Do I want to now, for the rest of the day, tell everybody what happened, keep living there and, re-reacting and replaying? Can you believe that? And again, I bring compassion always, which is, we're saying, hear me, this matters, I matter. Can you believe someone did that to me? That's what we're really trying to get said, to get validated. But now it's my choice. What do I want to do with all the thoughts about that person cutting me off? Now I'm in charge of my own peace. I'm in charge of that. The initial response, no, that has chemistry to it. That has all sorts of survival, protective. But going forward, what do I do with it? That's where the non-judgment, right? Do I want to hang out in grievance land and poison my own reality, poison my own present moment, poison my own experience? Well, now choice starts to come in, and I don't have to do that.
I'm really glad that you brought that up because I think a lot of times, and you talk about this in your book, people can switch to this portion where they become kind of like in a victim mode.
Yeah, very much. And they're identified with, oh, this happened to me, and so on and so on. And so, again, when we're bringing awareness to our own thinking mind, we're noticing, right, that, wow, I seem to turn everything into something that's happened to me. And let's look at that. Do I want to keep doing that? Why is it important to me to be the one harmed? Why does that feel like home? Why does that feel like who I am, the one everybody mistreats? So now we're into a conversation that can change things, but it has to start by noticing that the way I walk forward with every experience is what was done to me, right? So until we've got that in front of our lens, we can't change anything.
Well, as people are working through resentment and blame, what are some tips that you can give them that they can take baby steps to do that? Because I know a lot of people, they kind of get stuck in that cycle.
The first thing, as always, is awareness. Awareness is our kryptonite. It really is. Until we are aware of what we're doing, right, we really can't make any changes. So we're paying attention to our own thinking. That is the creator of our reality. So if we start to turn the lens and we notice, wow, I'm back in resentment. I'm back in that sort of toxic place of, can you believe this? Or why did this happen? And all of those kinds of thoughts. And then we start to look at, what is this doing to the quality of my life? So now remember, we're so aligned with the thinking that we can't get any space from it. But when we start to look at the thoughts, then we start to develop a kindness for ourselves, which is, what is that doing to me who's not these thoughts? Isn't that harming me to keep going over this anger I have? So now there's a me and there's a thought, a set of thoughts. Now I'm cooking, right? And how are all those resentful thoughts, those angry thoughts, how are they impacting the quality of my life, where I live on a daily basis, right? And so what do they really need to heal? What do they really need to find a different resolution? Because clearly thinking them and rethinking them and rethinking them and telling everyone about them is not helping them heal. So we have to get into a more real conversation, which means that there are two parties here. There's the thinker of the resentful thoughts, and there's the one that's listening to that all day.
Do you often have people say that they have fears about starting this practice, that, maybe something will go wrong?
I think it's revolutionary for most people to even think that they're not their thoughts, that they have a choice what they want to listen to. So what I have found over the years is not so much a fear. I would say that people are doubtful that they're not their thoughts. They really, because from the time that they were maybe 2 years old, there was only thought. There was one entity, them thinking. And so it's a kind of paradigm shift that is profound for most people, to realize that you're the listener, and that if what you want is peace, more thinking is not going to take you there. It's like you watch their eyes kind of go googly eyed, like out of a cartoon, because who they've always thought of themselves as being, I think therefore I am, is being questioned. And you watch this sort of moment of, oh my God, if I'm not my thoughts, well then who am I? Or what is this whole universe I've been living in? And it's a beautiful process. it's a really beautiful process. I think people have a real hard time with the idea that they could be addicted to thinking, because they think of addiction, as drugs or alcohol or something inherently negative. And thoughts are not negative. Listen, that's what distinguishes us as a species. Thoughts get us to the moon. Thoughts, I had to use thinking to write this book. It's that the way we are in relationship with our thinking is faulty, right? Thoughts, they're wonderful servants, but they're not a wonderful master. I would say the mind is, a wonderful servant, but it's not a wonderful master. And so we can be addicted to something that also is quite good for us. Look, if we have a glass of wine at the end of a long day, it's a beautiful thing. If we have a bottle of wine every single day, it starts to destroy our life. It's the same thing with thinking, right? We can use thinking, but again, who's using thinking, right? We're using this beautiful, beautiful tool of the thinking mind. But I don't want your mind to be running the show all the time and you sort of being dragged around your life by what's coming out of it. That's what I want to give people freedom from.
That sounds like a beautiful place to be. Because
Yeah.
so many of us, I've been doing this myself. We get kind of stuck in this negative mindset. So when we look at that, I mean, I know a lot of people are probably going, well, how do I determine what's, true information and what isn't?
Well, it's a good question. Reality testing is part of the practice that we do as we start to get free from thinking. So your thoughts generate all of this information and, these movies and this narrative. And we have to sort of check it, right? What of this is true? Because very often we find we don't even believe what's coming out of our mind. Even we are like, well, that's not really true. And it just feels so old and just sedimentized, conditioned material that it's just not believable even by us. The other thing I love to help people see is that, when we are telling ourselves, for example, all the things wrong with ourselves, which is a very common theme for people, what we're not allowing ourselves to do is be the person we would like to be. So we keep telling ourselves, well, you don't do this right and you don't do that right and so on and so on. Okay, well, quiet down. And how about I focus on being everything I want to be in this present moment, right? So stop telling me who I was at some other time with different awareness and different skills and different resources. Let me be it. And that there's something very freeing about that, to quiet the dialogue so that if this is who you want to be, here's the moment.
So when we look at this, I know there are times when people feel like, they wake up in the morning, the first thought they have is maybe of an embarrassing situation or a regret that they had in regards, a negative regret that they had. How do people work themselves out of that from the time they get up?
So we have to remind ourselves that when I made that choice, that was who I was. So a lot of what our thinking mind is trying to do is to, again, correct that, not leave that hanging out there, that that's who I was, the person who made that choice. And so we work on forgiving that and letting a version of yourself exist that isn't the version that you are now. So letting ourselves be a work in progress. Yes, that was in that moment what I thought was best, right? And even if they say to me, but I knew something else was best, well, guess what? The fact that you made that choice in that moment means still that that's what you were capable of. Because you didn't make that other choice that you are telling me you knew would have been better, tells me that you were only ready to make the choice you did. And so we have to let the past be the past, right? Rather than trying to think ourselves into a better path. So once we let that be, or for example, if we're trying to know something that we just can't know yet, we can't have the answer to it. I don't know why that person behaves that way. We have to get comfortable with, I don't know. That is the destination for now. I don't know. And that has to become a place that we're comfortable being in. Like all this thinking is really an attempt to know, because if we know again, we're safe. And yet, what interestingly, true peace and our real refuge comes when we can get comfortable in, I don't know, that is the answer. And that becomes a place that is so freeing rather than this desperate attempt to know what we can't know. And so what I encourage people to do is see if they can live in the questions rather than trying to answer them. Feel what it's like to ride their bicycle in the not knowing. And then that becomes this incredible refuge. Like when we say, I don't know how to do this. You know, there are moments that bring us to our knees where we surrender and we say, I've tried and I've tried and I've tried, and I can't make this happen, whatever it is. And those are the moments where we feel relief, a complete paradox, but we surrender to something larger in our world. We surrender and we say, I can't do this. I can't muscle my way through this. It's a very uncontemporary, sort of unsexy solution, but it's the surrender of, I can't think my way into a better way of experiencing this. And that is where we actually find relief. But we're never taught that. We're taught to keep looking for the answers until we find them, which often we don't. So it is a radical approach to what really creates peace.
To kind of dovetail on that, I mean, when we talk about fear, a lot of times people will have what appears to be like a perfectionist or controlling kind of attitude. And is that something that actually wraps around in the fear that we're talking about?
100%. Yeah, that's it exactly. It wraps around in the fear. And this is what I'm hoping to offer, is a different level of freedom, right? And it calls for a radically different approach. It's a real paradigm shift, but it wraps itself around. That's exactly it.
Do you have a story you can share with us?
A story about myself. I will say that I was walking through the park. The real birth of this was walking through the park and rehashing a difficulty that I had at the time with my partner at the time. And that waking up moment where I realized, wow, this state of suffering that I'm experiencing right in this moment, of all the feelings attached with what was not working. There's this beautiful day in the park. It was May 1st. And it was filled with flowers and filled with life and all of this beauty. And I was living in this dark hole, rehashing something that wasn't happening in the present moment, missing everything. And I had that moment where I realized I'm choosing this reality. I'm choosing to try once again to answer this question that I cannot answer. It is this way. Fight with reality, reality wins. Let it be this way. And for this moment, you have to say, I don't know. I don't know how this will change, but let me be in this park on May 1st and smell this aroma. And that changed my life, that moment. And that was the real birth of this book.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I know, you've worked with a lot of people, and it's always great to hear a personal story about how, you've worked through this. And I think a lot of times people are going, well, you have all this education and you know what to do. I can never accomplish that.
Yeah, that's not true. And what I would say is start with a small practice, like we talked about. Just start by paying attention to your own thinking. It's really so much simpler than people imagine it. And that's why I wrote the book without a lot of the Eastern vocabulary, because I know it scares people and it makes people feel like, well, I'll never get this. But really, it is that backward step to say, I'm not my thoughts. I am the one listening or not listening. That more thinking will not necessarily lead me to more peace. And that I don't have to take my thoughts so seriously. Coming back into the present moment. All of these sort of little pointers, right? They're very simple and they happen in a moment and they radically change your life. You don't need any training.
Well, I love that. I think that's so empowering, and your book gave so many tips and just information for people to kind of start today with moving their life forward. Why don't you share with us some of the signs that, hey, we might be an overthinker here?
Well, the overthinker usually knows they're an overthinker. I mean, there aren't too many overthinkers that it's a big surprise to tell them that they're an overthinker. They recognize that often they're in a state where they're going over and over and over the same thoughts and they desperately want out. Or they recognize that they're often rehearsing and rehashing negativity. And so it's not rocket science to realize that your mind is causing you suffering, but it is revolutionary to recognize that you're not your mind. And so anybody who is drawn to this topic is usually because there is an inkling that, wow, I'm just always thinking, or I'm never where I am, or wow, I really tend to focus on things that hurt, or I'm always, talking and thinking about what could go wrong or who did what to me. And so, they see the title and they're immediately awakened to, oh, that's me. I can't stop thinking. So some deeper wisdom in them, which is not made of thought, is saying, wow, I would like relief from all this thinking. I'd like to turn the noise down. I'd like to turn the chatter down and have some quiet, or at least be able to not have to chase after everything that showed up, on the screen that is my mind. They see the title and they right away say, wow, yeah, if only I could quiet my thinking for a moment. Wow, would that be peace?
Yeah, it'd be a great place to start from, especially if we're struggling with that. I mean, my goodness, Nancy, we could talk for hours. I just felt your book, Can't Stop Thinking, was such a great read,
I'm glad. I hope that it shifted some of the way you think. I mean, that's really what I'm after, is creating change in people's lives.
There was a lot that I learned from your book. There definitely was a lot that I learned. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about your work?
Sure. So the best way is nancycolier.com, and it's 1L, Colier. And I am a regular blogger for Psychology Today. So I'm always putting up new work. And I have lots of books on Amazon that are about all sorts of different topics, but the mind is a central theme of them. So always check in and see, buy a new book after you buy this one. But also, if you reach out to me through my website, we can maybe also go deeper and answer some questions that are specific to your thinking. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of places.
Well, Nancy, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
My pleasure. A delight.
Well, thank you, Nancy. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Can't Stop Thinking. Can't Stop Thinking's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. And of course, support our indie bookstores. If you'd like to connect with Nancy and learn more about her work and other books, visit nancycolier.com for more information. And make sure to sign up for her newsletter. I'd like to take a moment and thank everyone who has written into the show with your questions and comments. It's input from listeners like you that make the show the place where ideas can be explored and inspiring discussions can be had. If you have a suggestion for the show, please visit mariannepastana.com and contact us. We'd love to hear from you. Make sure to learn about this book and all the great books in the Moments with Marianne book club at momentswithmarianne.com for more information. And there we have books for every reader. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.